Good morning and welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Director of Social Media for HAR, and I am joined by one of my colleagues, Edward Moncur. He is HAR's Director of IT and Security. Welcome back to the program, Edward. It's been a little while.
Yes, good morning, Christina. Thanks for having me. It's been maybe a little more than a year, but it's always a pleasure.
Absolutely, and we're really excited to have you on this morning because there's so many updates. Technology moves fast, as we put in the promos for this program today, and we have a lot of new topics to discuss today, and a lot of which, you and I kind of met last week to discuss a little bit of what we wanted to talk about this morning because we see so many posts from realtor members asking questions about cybersecurity, asking about threats that they see or potentially see online. And so we thought it was just a great time to have you back on the program and give our members some updates so they can protect themselves and their clients. So I really appreciate your time this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. So if you are tuning in this morning and you are having, or you might have a question for Edward, type that in as we go through. And also take a moment to like and share this video so that others can hear what Edward has to say as well. So Edward, before we get into everything, again, it's been a little more than a year since you were on the program. So for any new members or people who haven't heard from you before, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Okay. I'm the IT director or director of IT and security. That security encompasses cybersecurity, but also due to the nature of the equipment that we run, there's a physical security component to it as well. I've been an IT professional for about 20 plus years or so, and I've held roles here at HAR and prior to HAR, from entry level tech support through network administration, and finally with overall having the responsibility for HAR's technology assets. The majority of those that we interact with, that members interact with a minor cutout for, I want to have this disclaimer, the website and the mobile app falls under another team, but every other technology component falls under my domain of expertise. I lead a small team, and we provide application support for staff. We manage cybersecurity. We look at our business continuity and remote work technologies, and of course, security is a very critical component that it's a critical part of the value that we deliver in our roles for HAR and for our members.
Absolutely, and it's also you mentioned the security, the data. That is also the member data, right? That we are having to keep secure for over almost 50,000 members. So similar to what we're just going to discuss today about keeping your clients' information secure, you would know because you're keeping our members' information secure as well. So thank you for that, and we appreciate that. So let's jump right into it. Some updates. What are some of the common cybersecurity threats that are facing the real estate industry right now?
So the realtors on a daily basis face many of the same cyber threats that any other individual or business would face. But there are some very specific risks that are, peculiar, I guess, to real estate agents and some of the folks in that industry. And that has much more to do with wire fraud and data breaches due to the sensitive nature of the client data that they access and store.
Okay, so we'll dive in a little bit more to that in a little bit, but let's talk a little bit. This is again a common question that I see, and it's been something that I think is plaguing the industry for a couple of years now. So much so that MLS rules have changed in regard to some of the threats that are out there. But let's talk about email and email authenticity when it comes to wire transfers. This is something that we hear about a lot. How can real estate professionals verify the authenticity of an email that could be requesting a wire transfer, or how could they guide a client on how to verify that authenticity?
So prior to any response that I'm going to give, I would hope that many of our brokerages and even smaller operations would have a policy or at least some training as it relates to wire fraud. I know some of the
Mm-hmm.
title companies have been very, very progressive in this space. But with that said, I would recommend that our members use what we refer to as out of band verification. For example, if you're being contacted by email, then you're going to go out of band and use a phone call as a follow up to verify that any instructions, any change to wiring information is something that you can verify, and that you know to the extent that you can, that you verify in person through a trusted source, to call the title company, call the lending institution, or sometimes even call the client, depending on how the that particular wire fraud instance manifests itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to never rely solely on any one form of verification for a wire transfer request. Hackers can easily spoof email addresses and trick individuals into wiring funds. And
Mm-hmm.
usually, you have a very limited period of time to be able to send instructions either to your bank or to law enforcement in order to stop those transactions from occurring.
Okay, great. So out of band verification, kind of like taking the online offline, right? Coming up with another
Exactly.
form of verification. So yes, very good. So this is something we hear all the time. We hear that it's so important to have a complicated password, right? And we've seen a lot of those commercials lately where it says you have 10,000 passwords or something like that for all these different websites. Can you explain why that's so important? But also, what are some of the best practices for really securing your login credentials to all these websites?
So the password, we think of as just sometimes a nuisance, an annoyance, right? It's something that one more thing we have to keep track of. The average business user has well over 100 passwords to remember. And so obviously that presents some challenges there. And humans, we're just not wired to come up with unique, good quality passwords. The password is the most important of the two components required for just basic verification to a website. Obviously, you need a unique username and you need a quality password. Uh, since the websites and services are available to just about everyone on the internet, it's important to use strong passwords to prevent improper access. Good passwords are at least 12 characters long. They include a mix of uppercase, lowercase, special characters, numbers, and symbols. And a good password is one that is not reused across multiple accounts. So you can't come up with just this one great password and say, you know what, it's so awesome, I'm going to use it for all of my accounts, because you're defeating the purpose there. And also, in recent years, we found that a practice for further securing your login credentials is to use multi-factor, sometimes referred to as two-factor authentication. And this adds an extra layer of security by requiring the user to provide a second form of authentication along with the password. And that can be either a software or hardware token that you have access to. Could be typically a 6-digit passcode that may be texted to you by your bank or some other website, or even biometric data using your Face ID or thumbprint. That additional verification makes it much more difficult for hackers to gain access to sensitive information, even if they've compromised your user's password.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So, one thing that we do see is, sometimes I might get an email that says, "Did you just try to log in? Somebody just tried to access your account." And a lot of times those are legitimate, and
Right.
I would imagine you're about to tell us you should definitely go change your password. But for example, sometimes I've noticed that those are also can be fraudulent. Or so how can we kind of verify those? Like, for example, I got one this weekend from Venmo, supposedly Venmo, that somebody just tried to access your Venmo account, and I realized that it wasn't actually coming from Venmo. So how can we verify that? Because I would imagine that if you get an email that says somebody just tried to access your account, you immediately go to try and change the password, right? But it seems that they're trying to get data from you in that way.
Yeah, in many of those instances where you're being contacted without having initiated some type of interaction with either a bank or one of those crowdsourcing or money transfer type services.
Mm-hmm.
Many of those instances you can ignore, because what it's asking you to do, if it's a phishing attempt, is really to click on a link that's embedded,
Okay.
and at that point, you're assuming that it's a trusted entity. You put in your username, password, or some other information that gives them the ability to access that account. In some instances, for example, with Facebook, you will see
Mm-hmm.
that someone tried to access your account. You can either ignore it, or recently Facebook has added a link that says, if this is not you, click here, and
Mm-hmm.
it makes a note that it was a fraudulent attempt.
Mm-hmm.
But usually, if we slow down and we look at the URL, if there's a link that's embedded, um, we can quickly determine that either the domain, if it's supposed to be coming from Facebook, then we should not have a Facebook verification at gmail.com. That's, obviously a free email service provider, or anything else that looks unusual, like a two-letter domain like .br,
Mm.
.ru, which are typically foreign-based, email or internet domains. So a little bit of caution. Look at the details, ask yourself, does it look like it's legitimate? Finally, if you want to take that extra measure of caution, reach out to a known number or a known support avenue, either through your provider
Mm-hmm.
or something that you have saved maybe in a password manager.
Okay, very good. So, on that note, what should a member do if they suspect a cybersecurity incident has occurred?
So if you think that there's a cyber incident that's occurred, the first step is to disconnect from whatever network or whatever website you've connected to, right? If you Hopefully you have some IT support. If you're working for a brokerage, you're working for a medium to large organization, reach out to your IT right away. Most IT departments, would rather be informed sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully there's no punitive actions for self-reporting an incident. Um, but you know, it, depending on what you think has been compromised in the instance of, let's say, wire fraud, for example, it's important to take action for multiple steps. Reach out to your financial institution, and then also reach out to the Internet Crime Complaint Center. It's www.ic3.gov, and that is a site and a group that's been put together by the FBI specifically
Mm.
to deal with cyber incidents. And in recent years, they've been actually very successful in clawing back funds that have been improperly transferred out as a result of a wire fraud. If it's not wire fraud, you know, well, before I move on, wire fraud is usually just the end uh, the end part of a campaign that has already compromised your email account,
Mm.
right? In many instances, someone's email account in that transaction, whether it's the realtor or a client or someone at a title company,
Mm-hmm.
has already been compromised, and they're looking for those conversations back and forth. So, um, email compromise typically happens, and then wire fraud comes at the tail end of that. And so, it's recommended to change your account passwords and then monitor any financial or media accounts for unauthorized activity.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Edward. Laura asked, are apps targeted for fraud?
Yes, apps are really just a mobile version of a website, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just as websites are targeted for fraud, apps are targeted for fraud. Now, um, the extent to which those are going to be targeted, will cause a whole lot of debate. There's the Apple camp versus the Android camp, and whether the Google Play Store does a better job at vetting apps than Apple does, right? I'm not going to get necessarily into that. I have my opinions. Um, I use Apple, almost exclusively, but I do have quite a bit of awareness with the Android Play Store, the Google Play Store as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yes, I would suggest, from an app standpoint, we are. Uh, we can all look on our phones and see there are apps we haven't used in a year, 2 years, 3 years. Go ahead and remove those apps because some of those companies are long dead, and they're these zombie apps that exist. Uh, a bad actor can go and buy that domain and buy the intellectual property of that app and now have access to everyone who has previously downloaded the app. So, um, kind of a wordy response, but yes.
Well, I'm a self-proclaimed digital hoarder, Edward, and that also applies to my apps. So I know what I need to do after this is over. I need to go delete some apps that I no longer use. I appreciate that. You mentioned phishing earlier. First of all, what is phishing, and what are some tips for avoiding phishing attacks?
So phishing with a PH, right? So phishing is really one of the most low tech scams that you'll come across, and it's really a social engineering methodology where uh, a hacker or an attacker is going to reach out to you either through email or text or any other. Sometimes it can even occur over the phone, using a human to human engagement to convince you that they're a trusted entity, and in that interaction to get you to give up your credentials to, again, banking or investment accounts, or in some cases even your airline points and awards accounts. These all have some value, and phishing is just really an interaction where they try to monetize that interaction. So attackers are after login credentials primarily. It can come in the form of deceptive email, come in the form of a text message. It can come in the form of an unsolicited phone call from your bank. And so it's important to not only be vigilant when opening an email, but if you get a phone call and it sounds like it's a really busy offshore call center, and that's not typical of your experience when you've talked to your bank in the past, that's a pretty good indicator that that's some type of social engineering attempt. And they have evolved, the attackers have, to the point that they can actually interact with you and send you verification requests by text. So they're somewhat sophisticated in those instances. Obviously, hang up, uh, reach out to your bank through a known number, or reach out to whatever institution you think you're dealing with or being contacted by a known phone number. And in many instances, just ignore and delete the emails or text messages.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Edward. A couple of comments and questions came in. Alicia is in the same boat as me. She said, "Oh, gee, deleting apps now." Val asked, "Can we get a list of zombie apps?" So I don't know if you know of any specific apps
No,
offhand
no.
with the millions of
Again,
apps available to us.
absolutely. Yeah, and zombie apps is it's a term that I've heard before. So it's not quite an official term, but um, because the threshold to getting into the app development or even presenting a business online is significantly low. You really just need technical expertise and the ability to get it published. There's no way to keep track of it. There's no list that I'm aware of. So the suggestion is to go through the apps that you have. Do I need it? Okay, maybe this one, do you still have Angry Birds from like 7 years ago? If you haven't played it, just take it off, right? Or any of those you know entertainment style games. And I'd also go as far as to say, don't let your kids play apps on their phones, right? Maybe get them a separate device, because the threats that are presented through apps or websites or games that are intended specifically for children, it doesn't reduce your risk. We can see that even home computers are targeted to get to information that's stored on your work uh, uh, systems, and so apps would also present a similar kind of risk.
Okay. CJ just made a comment that she said, "I would think taking the time to report the fraudulent incidents would be helpful." So, and it sounds like you would agree with that, Edward.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Just a comment that I wanted to mention. It was put in the comments, but I wanted to make sure everybody saw it. HAR has a very good relationship with local law enforcement agencies, and we have had Houston Police Chief Finner on this program before. He is actually working on assigning a specific person in his department to handle reports of scams and crimes that realtor members experience. So once that is available, we have the data for that. We will be sure to inform all HAR members, so that, and it just makes it a little easier to have a specific person to get in touch with, as opposed to just making a report and hoping that it's getting in the right hands. Very good. Val just made another comment. As a child of the Pong era, I'm technologically challenged. Thank you for helping us navigate the bad guys. So yes, we agree. I agree with that, Edward.
My pleasure.
Yes. So let's talk about protecting client data a little bit. How can real estate professionals protect sensitive client information from potential data breaches?
The first step would be to regularly update your operating system software. Usually we're going to be prompted for automatic updates by Microsoft or Apple or even on our phones, whether it's going to be an Android based phone. So take your updates as regularly as you can. Apple in particular is very good about pushing critical updates, or what they would deem something that would pose a risk to users based on what we call in the industry 0 day, because you have 0 days of warning before this exploit is available. So Apple is incredibly good at that. Microsoft is as well. Take those updates on a regular basis. You should also take the time to make sure that you have antivirus software installed on your computer and set to auto update as well, and firewall software to block any unauthorized attempts from a remote computer to your internal computer. Now, many of us who have a router at home that we connect to, there's a firewall that's typically built in, so you're generally safe. But I always recommend to take the extra step to make sure that the software firewall on your computer is also activated. I'd also say for brokerages, they can increase the security by utilizing role-based access controls within the organization, because it limits the amount of information and the type of system access granted to each user based on their role within the company. Even within HAR, if there's an employee that doesn't require access to certain things, we don't give them access. And that's not something that we're saying you're not important, because everyone's important. But it's a matter of risk, and we take managing that risk very seriously, because in the IT space, your currency is really trust. And so if our members lose trust in our ability to warehouse and securely hold that information, then it really causes a problem for us. I would encourage the principals in brokerages to think about that as well, because we think of the financial risk posed by cyber incidents, but we don't think of the reputational risk that also carries some financial consequences as well.
Great point. Thank you. So you mentioned also earlier in this program a ransomware attack. What is a ransomware attack, and how can real estate professionals protect themselves, against them?
So a ransomware attack is a malicious, it's an instance where malicious software is somehow downloaded on a computer, and it encrypts or locks up the data, sometimes just specific types of files, in other cases almost the entire computer, and then makes a demand of the victim to pay a ransom in order to have that data unencrypted or released. The ransomware attacks can be devastating, and I don't remember exactly what the statistic is, but the FBI and other law enforcement puts out numbers that indicate that somewhere, north 50% of small to medium businesses that suffer a ransomware attack go out of business within the next 2 years.
Wow.
Right? So the way that it can impact you can be, somewhat mild to absolutely devastating. What determines the impact is really going to be your own awareness of what the consequences can be, and what preparations and steps you can take prior to experiencing a ransomware attack. And so the best thing you can do again, comes back to the firewall software, antivirus type software, but those are not absolutes. You also want to make sure that you have good data backups done regularly. You don't want to have a backup from last month and now you're into the next month, right? Particularly in a fast moving business or fast paced business, a backup from a month ago, it might as well could be just as good as a year ago, right? You're not going to be able to recover from that. So regular backups, typically stored securely and offsite, would be the best way to be able to recover from a ransomware attack.
Okay, great. We had another question come in. Laura is asking, do you recommend replacing your routers?
Laura has some really good questions today. Um, yes. Um, it reminds me of a phrase I heard before. A router is not a toaster, right? It's not like you get it for, maybe a wedding gift and then 7 years later it still works and so you don't replace it. Routers have certain capabilities, and as time goes by, the companies that produce those will not provide updates for them anymore. You'll also find that the longer they're out in the market, the more uh, they're being exploited for uh, any unpublished vulnerabilities. So the frequency with which you update your routers is going to really be dependent on what you do. I would say every 3 to 4 years, go ahead and replace your router, because you can not only increase your security posture, but you can get some certain benefits from higher transfer speeds, in the case of wireless routers, and better coverage throughout your home or your office. So yes, replacing those on a regular basis is a very good recommendation.
Great. Speaking of recommendations, we have a few people asking for your recommendations on some specifics here. HAR.com actually asked, do you have recommendations for password managers, some of the best ones that you'd recommend?
Yes, so we've recommended password managers in the past. We've
Mm-hmm.
recommended LastPass, LAST, LASTPASS,
Mm-hmm.
LastPass. The concept is it's the last password you'd have to remember. There's one master, one long master password you remember, and from that point, the application will generate and hold those passwords for every website that you need to interact with. There's also one password and a number of others, but those two are two of the bigger players in the space.
Okay.
Um, some of the benefits that you get, and I think the key benefit would be that they're cross-platform supportive, meaning that if you have it installed on your PC and you update your passwords there, you go over to your Mac, it automatically presents on your Mac once you have either the app or the plugin installed.
Okay.
And then also, you now move over to your mobile device, it's available on your mobile device. So there's a ton of convenience there. There's some pretty good security. Now, I will say that you'll hear from time to time that companies are going to have some type of data breach, and LastPass is no different. They've had some data breaches in the past that presented varying degrees of risk. So do your own independent research. Your mileage may vary. I think that even with those risks, we are in a much better place using a password manager than coming up with unique passwords on our own. Again, the typical user has in business has over 100 passwords to remember, and if you're in Houston, you can only use rockets and clutch and some variation of those things uh, so often before you really compromise your security.
Astros 1, 2, 3, right? Um, okay, another recommendation, if you will, Rubina is saying, do you have any recommendations for good cybersecurity websites?
I don't quite understand what the
I think we
question is
mean,
necessarily.
I think we're maybe looking at um, software, maybe antivirus software is I think where we're
So
leaning towards here.
yeah, so the antivirus software, Microsoft Defender is actually a pretty good one. It's free. It goes, every couple of years, it's either Microsoft Defender or Windows Defender or some naming convention that Microsoft decides. But There's a free version that works very well, and while there are pay versions of antivirus software that's out
Mm-hmm.
there, some that have been in the business for quite a long time, I find that the free version that Microsoft provides is actually pretty good. But anyone that has very specific questions, can reach out after today. cyber@har.com, and me and the team will do our best to get some recommendations out to you.
Excellent. And that was what Rubina was looking for, antivirus software. So great. Thank you.
Okay.
So I have a few more questions for Edward, but if you have questions, please type them in, and we'll get to as many as we can. So a lot of emerging technologies in every space. But let's talk about real estate specifically. What are some emerging technologies that could impact cybersecurity in the real estate industry?
So, there are a ton of things that happen. I mean, the frenetic pace of tech development is mind blowing. But I'll give you an example of one
Mm-hmm.
particular emerging technology that causes me some concern, and that is AI, right, or artificial intelligence. AI in particular, the risks that we face today through the tools that are readily available to just about anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, AI will contribute to the use of deep fakes, and a deep fake is really content,
Mm-hmm.
typically a photo or audio or video
Mm-hmm.
that is so convincing that it's hard for the average user to determine that it's not correct, right,
Mm-hmm.
or not legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
So um, the AI tools that are available are so sophisticated and so simple to implement that they can create realistic audio and video content that can be manipulated in many different ways. And usually that's used to further a cybercrime incident. They want to convince you that it is your boss asking you to buy 50 gift cards from Walgreens from,
Right.
and scratch off the codes and text it to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, you know, it is, they are convincing. The facial expressions can be mimicked. The voices can be mimicked within such a so closely that
Mm-hmm.
it's a deep level of faking some content. Um, AI can also be used to automate the creation of these deepfakes. So they can do they can pivot fairly quickly, and they can generate multiple instances. So it makes it much more difficult to mitigate, identify, and remediate these types of attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And as AI continues to evolve and become even more accessible, the threat posed by deepfakes and other forms of AI-enabled cybercrime is very likely to grow.
Yeah, so very important for us to be aware of that because, like you said, it could be your broker, it could be the CEO of your organization. If for anybody who's never seen this before, I would encourage you to, after this is over, maybe go to YouTube or do a little Google search of a deep fake video, and you can find them of so many different elected officials, and they're saying, oh, I
Right.
love pineapple on my pizza or something, that they've never said that before, but we have them on video, or seemingly have them on video saying that. And it can be very convincing. So definitely something for us to watch out for and just be aware of, I think, is really the important thing right now. Let's talk about social media and impersonation on social media, because we see this in the real estate industry all the time. I see realtors' accounts being impersonated. So, how can we prevent our social media accounts from being impersonated?
Um, to protect your social media accounts, the first steps you can take is to adjust your privacy settings. And for example, on Facebook, you can limit who the audience is that's able to see who your friends are.
Mm.
You can also use a pseudonym instead of your actual name. You can, um, make yourself aware of certain social engineering attacks, typically implemented through social media. Um, if you become aware of your account being impersonated or a friend's account being impersonated, there are tools to report those. those fake accounts
Mm-hmm.
that typically result in those accounts being taken down fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Instagram does a really good job, and Facebook, obviously, the same entity under different names, um, do a really good job.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd also say, be careful what you share. We want to appear to be personable. We want to appear, I think in the instance of real estate professionals, you want to show you're a real person. You have all these things going on. Maybe you're very well connected and involved in the community, but all of this information that you post, whether it's your location data, where your kid plays baseball, those types of things, um, you're giving up information that can be potentially used to further, cyber impersonation on
Mm-hmm.
your social media. So, not an exhaustive list. Again, if you reach out to us, we can give you some recommendations. But
Mm-hmm.
if we take the time and just Google a little bit uh, to your specific use case, your specific preferred platform, there's a litany of bits that will tell you how you can further secure it. And you don't have to get everything correct, right? One or two, filters, one or two controls that you put in place
Mm-hmm.
can, put you well ahead of your peers, right? And so you don't have to be the best. You just don't want to be the most vulnerable.
Absolutely. So definitely take some time, especially um, Facebook has a very robust security section. So after this is over, I would encourage people to go look at that. Facebook even has a setting where it will recognize your face in a photo that another account took. So, for example, I got a notification just maybe a couple months ago. I was at a local community event and I was in the background of a photo, and Facebook picked up this tiny little my face in the teeny tiny background, but it found me, and so it was face recognition, and I was like, oh wow, they caught it. But yeah, so some great security settings that you could be looking into along those lines, because again, we see this so much. We hear this reported from brokers and agents a lot. How can I tell if an email, a text message, a direct message on social media, how can I tell if those are a scam or potentially malicious?
So let's start with email messages.
Okay.
You can ask yourself a few questions. The first is, do I know the sender?
Mm-hmm.
Second, is the language and the wording being used typical of how this person who's supposedly known to you is known to communicate?
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, CEO, CFO, someone who's not necessarily within direct working proximity, that may be harder to tell.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you at HAR, everyone's approachable. If you reach out to me as my CEO, I know exactly if there's not certain words being used and a certain geniality, I can tell you I can dismiss it right off the cuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Further, is what's being requested of you typical either of this interaction or typical of your job role? Is there a stated sense of great urgency? And maybe I'm in a meeting, so don't reach out to me, just go ahead and do it. And does the sender's email address appear to originate from the correct internet domain? Again, if it's an HAR employee or someone that I typically do business with, and it's showing that they're sending that from a Gmail account or a Hotmail account, um, it's easy to determine that it's potentially malicious. And there's no guarantee, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what you do is you give it all of these things will give you a weighted value in your mind. It's like, you know what, I'm just going to dismiss it. And you can also report it to your IT team if you have one. In the case of social media direct messages,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'd start off with, is this coming from a friend or a contact?
Mm-hmm.
Have you confirmed that the sending account is not an impersonated version of a friend's social media account?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, Instagram, for example, will show you, is there a chat history that you had prior? It
Mm-hmm.
shows the follower count or post count, right? And so, you know, if you see our CEO, for example, Bob Hale, and you see that, there's a photo that looks like Bob, but you see that there's zero followers, zero posts, or even, it may not be zero, but it's below what you'd expect for Bob or a person of some note
Mm-hmm.
on social media, again, that's an indicator that's not legitimate. And in many cases, the social media will let you know this is a new account as well. So there's a lot of visual clues that you can look at if you slow
Mm-hmm.
down just a bit before you engage, in order to determine that this is coming from someone that I know, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's not. Maybe it's coming from an attacker.
Okay, very good. So slow down, take your time, do a little investigating. Makes sense. Or, as you mentioned earlier, take it offline and maybe send them a text message or give them a phone call to verify. Great. I do see we had a couple questions. Actually, one question that came in that I wanted to address, I think there was another question that already got answered. Teresa's asking, are there software for security cameras and vacuums, et cetera? You've mentioned this before because we have so many devices, smart devices in our homes now,
Right.
that you might be connecting, via your Wi-Fi or whatever the case is. So, what is your recommendation there?
So that's also a very excellent
Mm-hmm.
question. What I've done in my own home, and you can implement this to varying degrees, right, is most routers will give you the ability to set up more than one SSID or network name, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at my home, for example, I have one network, wireless network name that presents for my IoT devices, my Internet of Things devices. So my TVs, my automated garage door opener, my Ring doorbell camera, um, all of those types of devices
Mm-hmm.
that really don't communicate, with anything else except for the convenience features that I want.
Mm-hmm.
I put those on a separate um, network name or a separate wireless SSID. And
Mm-hmm.
then for my internal usage, I have yet another one, and I'll run all of my critical, my laptop, my desktop, you know, um, all of those devices will be on that network. And I have even another one for my wireless security cameras because that is another, potential
Mm-hmm.
threat vector.
Yeah.
You don't have to go crazy with it, but if it makes sense to you, I would say at least have one guest network because it doesn't always show up as an option to say, okay, how many SSIDs can I show up? It will usually
Mm-hmm.
show up as a guest network, so you can have multiple guest networks, and segregate your devices based on importance in how they should access the internet or how they should access other parts of your network.
Okay, very good. Manaz said, "What a great idea! Different networks." Going back to the impersonation on social media, we just had a couple comments that I wanted to mention. Anne Marie said, "A lot of times when they are creating these accounts, they're copying the posts. But if you actually look at the date on the posts, it will be weeks after the original person posted it." So the great comment there. And of course, a really good recommendation here from Lydia. We can also ask people to report the account if it's not ours. That is the first thing I know I say, and I know you say to
Right,
people if they present us, oh, my account looks like it was impersonated, report it. Tell everybody you know that to report it so that it gets removed quickly. Yeah.
right.
Very good. So just a couple more questions for you, and this is another one that I've seen a little bit. We talk about realtor safety a lot. Unfortunately, realtors can be targets for physical safety, and we've seen some reports of people becoming aware of maybe they discovered an unauthorized location tracker attached to their vehicles or something like that. Do you have any advice for? I know we haven't had that reported by our members here locally, but we have seen this in some news across the country. Do you have any advice for our members on how they can protect themselves and just to how to even be aware if there's an unauthorized tracker maybe on your vehicle?
Yeah. So, like you said, I'm not aware of any of our members having experienced this, but it's
Mm-hmm.
something that comes up in the news quite often. Uh, this is an example of the potentially negative impacts of technology and how it can directly impact your physical security.
Mm-hmm.
And so we think of cybersecurity impacting the finances and reputational side. And this here is technology being used to perhaps compromise your physical security. Wireless location trackers, like the Apple AirTag, they're great. If you're traveling and you want to make sure your luggage didn't get misplaced, or they're saying it's in Houston, but it happens to be in Minneapolis, that's it's a great purpose for that. And so I'm not
Mm-hmm.
discouraging the use of those trackers, but the ubiquity of those devices and the fact that they're so small, portable, and easily hidden makes it also useful for a potential thief, a potential stalker, or former romantic partner
Mm-hmm.
to track you without your knowledge. And the results of that can range from just petty property crimes or minor harassment to something that's much more serious.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, Apple and Tile, who are two of the biggest players in this space, they have come up with some tools for detecting these unauthorized trackers traveling with you. Um, at the moment, you have to have both the apps installed in your phone. Apple and Tile are working along with some
Mm-hmm.
other industry leaders to come up with a standard to make it easier for consumers to have maybe one app that can scan them all. But Tracker Detect is an app for Android users, and the Find My app on iPhone is used to detect unpaired AirTags traveling with you. I would also suggest that if you have had your vehicle out of your possession for maybe a vehicle service appointment,
Mm-hmm.
a detailing appointment, maybe a valet driver had your car for a moment. We know valet drivers take very good care of your cars, right? At all times. Or you've recently provided a lift to someone you don't know, such as a potential client. I know realtors used to do it back in the day. I don't know if they do, but you just never know what someone's motives are. And so, if at any point in time the vehicle has left your exclusive control,
Mm-hmm.
then go ahead, fire up the app, scan a couple of times, and it'll let you know if there's a device that is traveling with you.
Mm-hmm.
The Tile app does multiple scans, so if one scan will find a tile, let it do at least 4 or 5 scans. Don't become paranoid, and then just do a cursory look around in your car to see that everything's fine. I'd
Okay.
also want to just put one finer point on
Mm-hmm.
tracking. You don't necessarily have to have an AirTag or a tile to be tracked. If someone leaves Apple audio AirPods, such as the one I have in my ear, if they leave that in your vehicle, if they leave an iPhone behind or an iPad, those can also be tracked using the Find My feature,
Mm-hmm.
or the Find My app on Apple. So again, something to be aware of.
Okay, very good. And this happened to Rubina just recently. She said, we just bought a car from a Mercedes dealership and there was an Apple AirTag in the trunk of the car. So, yeah, but a great suggestion there to scan, especially if it's new to you or been out of your possession for a while. Um, and Manaz asked if we could put the name of the track finders. The one you just mentioned was Tracker Detect, so I'm sure we can.
Tracker Detect,
Uh huh.
and the Find My app on the iPhone. Someone
Great.
from my team will be putting it into the chat in just a moment.
Very good. Thank you. So we are over time with you, Edward, but we had so many
Okay.
questions for you today, and our members are loving it. I do have one more question for you. What are some
Mm-hmm.
strategies? You've mentioned this a little bit before, and we might have some brokers tuning in. So, what are some strategies that real estate brokerages can use to protect sensitive information, and why is it important to keep security policies up to date?
Uh, Two of the they're not particularly complex to implement at brokerage level. There's services that'll do it, but there's also other ways to explore this. Data loss prevention and encryption. Encryption can be enacted on emails, for example, with maybe 2 or 3 extra clicks of your mouse.
Mm-hmm.
And why that's important is that the types of data that you're moving, could be people's tax records, whether it's an agent that's coming on with your brokerage, or it could be client data that's errantly sent to you. Those tools will make sure that data loss prevention, for example, would identify certain types of sensitive data, uh, crossing your network, and will identify or even prevent it from being passed. And the reason for that is that, you know, there's obviously, I mentioned before, the reputational risk. Do you want to be that known as that brokerage that had this major breach of client data? You know, you spend so much time and effort getting those qualifications, certifications, building a brand, only to have it potentially, damaged by careless practices. Um, Encryption, again, securely encrypts the data so that unauthorized parties can't view it. In the case of an email, emails pass through multiple points before they get to their destination, and they can also be accidentally addressed to someone who is not authorized to view it. And I'll close on this particular point here. Microsoft, for example, in their encryption, you can actually, even if you subscribe to Office 365, you can actually put finer controls and say, hey, not only do I want this encrypted, but I want it to not have the ability to be forwarded to another party. So there are some extra controls usually already available to you if you're using cloud-based services. And it just takes a little bit of exploring and kind of, asking around and attending sessions like this to be made aware that they exist.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Edward. Our members are thanking you. Donna said, wow, so much great information. Thank you. Deborah said, great information. Thank you so much. Val said, great info, Christina and Edward. Thank you for always sharing your time. Every HER member should watch this presentation. And then she followed that up with, this should be a part of new member orientation. So yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, very good. So Edward, again, you've shared a lot of great information today. Any final thoughts for our members? Anything else that you want to share today?
Yeah. What I'd like to say in closing is that, don't think that all is lost. If you take an incremental step towards improving your security posture today, it's going to put you that much closer to your goal, right? So one or two incremental steps over time will make huge impacts in your overall security posture, and make sure that you're not that realtor, you're not that brokerage who experienced this catastrophic data breach or data loss.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Edward. Well, that is it for this Member Focus Monday. Be sure to mark your calendars because we will be back next Monday at 9 a.m. with HR's Director of MLS, Sean Delphine. He's going to be talking about recent changes and updates to Matrix and what could be coming down the road. So mark your calendars to hear from Sean, our Director of MLS, and hear all your Matrix updates next week. Again, Edward, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.